Hey, everybody, welcome back to 10 Park Time. We're trying to be a little edgier, so I'm going to deepen my voice here. Just deeper. So, I am the Turn,
I'm the Bark.
and we have been here a long time. It is season 5, episode 9. That's English 9, not 9 as in German. Because today, I will set a stage for you. On our podcast today, we are about to dive into one of the most notorious and enduring mysteries of our time. Jack the Ripper. So, let's take a journey back. It's the 19th century in London. For those of you confused, that means the 1800s. Okay? And there's a killer roaming the streets. Remember, this is before the time of the word serial killer, which will not be invented until later. And his name, we don't know. But he will go by, not he, but, because there's so many points in this. I love this. I'm so glad we picked this topic. But we're going to talk about Jack the Ripper tonight. I can't hold that pose anymore. It's just not who I am as a person. So it is in the late 1800s in London, England, the East End in particular. It's a very crowded, impoverished place, and it's known for crime. It's known for danger, especially at night, and it's on the edge of like London, so it's not in the heart of it. Parker?
The community of Whitechapel is where we're going. According to a quick Google, London's about 5 million people at this point in history. The East End has 900,000 people in it, and Whitechapel has 76,000 people. So it's quite crowded. I always think about in world history or AP World, we talk about the industrialization, and like the impact of industrialization is people living in tenements, so like apartment buildings, really, really, really tightly packed together. The overworking of everyone. The increase of pollution, and kind of like how it leads to the ills of society, increased drinking, increased prostitution, right? People having to turn to less than, I guess, noble means to make a living.
Socially acceptable? I guess it's socially acceptable.
Well,
we won't dive into that rabbit hole. We'll bounce out.
I guess officially not on the level as being acceptable, but awfully pervasive.
Correct. Okay. Yep, I'm in. Oh,
not legalized. It's illegal. Wait, no, hold on. Take that back. Because there was a guy that was accused of gross indecency, but that was because it was same gender activities. Don't know if it was necessarily against the law to be a lady of the night at that time in England.
Not sure.
Or as they would say on the Seattle waterfront, a seamstress. Many, many single seamstresses on the Seattle waterfront.
Lots of sewing going on over there.
Yeah, people tearing their pants, mining, things like that.
You gotta fix them. This is gonna turn into a comedy podcast.
You're right quick.
Yep.
Now, I would say the first thing that really surprised me is that, like you said, serial killer. Serial killer doesn't get coined until the 70s by the FBI.
Yep.
How many people... I was really surprised by the death toll that is. Jack the Ripper has such this ambiance or like presence of being like this really menacing person, and most people only say that there's 5 deaths that they can for sure tie to Jack the Ripper, and even of those, some people say there are only 3 that are really, really connected.
Yep.
When you think about it, and like I was just looking at like, I was looking at Gary Ridgway, and the Spokane one.
The
Okay.
yeah, Central was like one of his first places. Why can't I think of it? This shows Phil Frost, who's listening to this podcast right now, is probably just shouting at the whatever he's listening to it on, just like I know it. It's
Robert Lee Yates.
Oh, that's not who I was thinking of at all.
Oh, he was the grocery bag killer in Spokane. And both of these guys, like, he has 16 plus victims, and Gary Ridgway has 49.
Wow.
Yeah. And so, like, when you think about, like, who gets top billing,
Oh yeah.
like, Jack the Ripper's way up here. But in comparison to modern serial killers, like, and I guess the other piece of it is those guys have been caught and have admitted to a lot more crime that we didn't know about. And there was a number of murders that they were responsible for that we didn't know. Yeah. So I guess one of the things to talk about before we kind of dive into who could it be?
Oh God, that's a whole can of worms.
Yeah, it's a flat of worms. All of these, what they call the canonical five.
Yep.
I love how it sounds like it's a comic book, like series of like.
Well, it sounds like it's weird to me how they named, like, because that was one of the first things I noticed too, was that they actually have labeled them, right, the canonical five. Like that was, to me, that was bizarre, right? Because you think of like, but I guess that jumped out at me as part of what was going on. So
I think it's a lot of it's advertising. So it starts August 31st in 1888. So in the East End, somebody at 3:40 a.m. finds the body of Polly or Marianne Nichols. And again, one of I guess forensic science was fairly new, like very infant stage. Mm-hmm. She had a deep cut across the throat, 2 stabs to her lady parts, and then part of her abdomen was essentially kind of like torn open, and like her entrails were like kind of coming out. And then a week later, Annie Chapman is found on September 8th at 6 a.m. Again, the body is found, not necessarily that it's not when the crime happens, when the body's found. And she has, again, 2 deep cuts across the throat.
Her abdomen's cut open as well, completely open,
flayed pretty good. Yeah. And like some of the flesh and stuff is thrown over one shoulder, and like her intestines are thrown over the other, and then her uterus is removed, as well with pieces of a couple of other organs that, for decency's sake, we will leave to the imagination.
We are trying not to get kicked off of YouTube.
Yes. And then a couple weeks go by, nothing happens. Yep. But at this time, like, there's a number. I think what the real difference here is newspapers and advertising.
Well, yeah, this is hyped up in terms of like news, right? It writes itself better than a novel, or a scary movie. Sorry, it's 1800s. A scary novel, a story that's like printed in the news, like that keeps building. Yeah.
You know what I mean? I think it happens, and then people start talking about it, and it gets in the newspaper. There's a ton of different newspapers, and also we know that newspapers during this time aren't exactly the best at telling the truth. They're really good at selling papers.
Well, that's what it found interesting, right? Because then we start to figure out, because we see 2 similar murders, 2 similar, like, I guess calling cards would be what I would use, like, in terms of what they're doing. But what I found interesting was then after the Chapman murders, the first time that we get a description of him, her, we'll get into that later.
Them?
But, yeah, them. But again, Chapman was seen by Elizabeth Long outside of 29 Hanbury Street at 5:30 a.m. in the company of a dark-haired man wearing a brown deerstalker hat, a dark overcoat, and of a shabby genteel appearance. Where if I had sound effects, I'd go dun 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 dun.
Well, and then a few weeks later, there's a letter sent to one of the newspapers, the Central News Agency, on the 25th of September, postmarked, and it's called the Dear Boss letter. And it essentially kind of lays out, like, at first they kind of just write it off as a hoax. They think somebody's just pulling their leg. And he kind of alludes to the idea of saying something about, like, something about your ears. I'm going to clip the lady's ears off to get your, or something like that, gained attention, because 2 nights later, there's 2 women that are murdered in the same night. Elizabeth Stride and Catherine Eddowes. And they think that Elizabeth Stride, the murder was interrupted because there was only one 6-inch cut along the throat.
Mm-hmm.
And then later that night, Catherine Eddowes is found, and like her neck is cut like from ear to ear. Her nose is severed. There's vertical slits in the eyelids. There's triangular incisions on her cheeks pointing towards the eyes. She's again kind of like flayed open and is missing her uterus and her left kidney. And, well, there was a piece of inscription somewhere that was found somewhere, I think, on a bloody apron or something. It said, "The Jews are the men that will not be blamed for nothing." And it's not spelled, it's Juwes. Not like the ethnic group or the religious group coming out of the Middle East, but some people in one of the documentaries that I watched said that potentially was a reference to the Freemasons.
Oh, interesting. Again, after that murder, though, we get another witness, right? There's a cigarette salesman. His name's Joseph. I'm gonna say, would you go Lawende? Lawenden? Lawende?
Yeah.
Okay, so he passed by a narrow walkway on Might Square, just outside of the church passage, with 2 of his friends shortly before the murder. And he described seeing a fair-haired man of medium build with shabby appearance with a woman who may have been, I'm going to say, is it Eddowes? Is that how we said it? Eddowes. And there's the bloody apron. And his companions weren't able to confirm that description. They couldn't remember, but again, this ultimately becomes known as the double event, right? So now we're up to 4 murders. And if you were counting for those at home, you know that we got one more at least coming. Okay. And then, yes, that's the chalk description. The Jews, the men that will not be blamed for nothing. Keep going. I got you.
Okay. A few more, I guess, postcards or letters are written to newspapers in London. And at this point, they're not sure if they're legitimate or if it's people who are just trying to copycat and jump in on the fame. But the last of the big 5 murders is Mary Jane Kelly. And what kind of sets this one apart is the rest of the victims were murdered kind of like out and about, like in an alleyway or someplace where you might exchange a little bit of money for a little bit of company really quickly.
Yes.
Except for Mary Jane Kelly had a single room. So like she had her own room that she rented out. Apparently was terribly behind, like months behind on the rent. She was discovered, and the level of, I guess, brutality of this murder is just like off the charts. Like they actually photograph it, and I don't think we can put it in the video.
Let's just avoid that. But if you are curious, that was one of the first things that came across, and it is they took a photo. Like, let's just leave it at that.
Yeah. Like her face is like beyond recognition.
Hacked beyond recognition.
Yeah. She's eviscerated. Like, so I was like, that's an SAT word. But good Lord, like, yeah, she's just kind of really like very, very torn up, but the only organ that is missing is her heart. but like there's literally a pile of just bodies,
Yeah.
like on the end table or like on the foot of the bed. Like
They
one of the
were-
big
so
questions. One of the big questions that people have is how could somebody? There's no way that you would commit that. Some of the other acts, they're like, well, there's potentially ways to do that. Wouldn't create a lot of like essentially like backsplash, but to do that amount of damage to the human body and to be able to like leave a residence covered in that much gore, you would think would be
noticeable.
very conspicuous.
Yeah. Going back really quick on that, because just other things that were unique about this one versus the business murder about the other ones is that, again, her throat is slit. So again, commonality, but it's slit all the way down to her spine. Her body's empty of organs. Most of the organs are, so her uterus, kidneys, and one breast are actually placed beneath her head. And then her other organs are placed like beneath her feet. So yeah. Again, if you really, I've seen the photo enough now, I don't need to see it again, but like, if you have not seen the photo and you are so inclined, it does exist. So
thank goodness it's in black and white.
Yes, thank the Lord.
And I think it's also, people say it's one of the first times that like the police actually took a crime scene photo.
Yep.
So it kind of like, and this is in the time period where one of the best-selling books that's going around is, good Lord, Sherlock Holmes.
Yep.
Right. So there's a lot of this idea of, kind of people, gumshoe people kind of going around like making these investigations, and there's kind of an overlap of police forces involved. They interview over 2,000 witnesses. You know what I mean? So it's not like the police didn't do anything. Some people question whether they did as much as they could because the victims were sex workers. And that's one of the reasons that, I mean, historically, those are people on the margins of society are the ones that are targeted by these people because nobody will miss them. And like you victimize people who essentially are going to be afraid to go to the police because of the activities that they're involved in.
Correct.
I don't know how you want to deal with who they think it might be, just because I feel like the list goes on and on and on.
So the biggest thing that we can understand, this is similar, and if in a more, I guess, how do I say this? In a more whimsical way, not to talk about Jack the Ripper, but there's a lot, if you've paid attention, there's a lot of questions about who Shakespeare was. And was he one person? Was he multiple people? Was he a woman? You know what I mean? Just, it's been one of those things that's never kind of been proven. And Jack the Ripper falls into that line where there are suspect after suspect after suspect, right? Like, there are famous people that are considered suspect, including Lewis Carroll. Now, Barker, trivia question. Who's Lewis Carroll?
Lewis Carroll's let's see, what's his real name is Charles, or does, hold on. Lewis Carroll's his real name, right? And then
Correct.
Charles Dodson is the pen name.
Correct.
Okay.
I believe so.
He's the author of Alice in Wonderland.
Correct.
And one of the interesting things is that he's listed on there as being a potential, like him and an accomplice of committing these murders. But that claim wasn't made until like the 1990s.
Oh, okay.
It's written in a book. Because I was really confused. I was like, how does the dude, I mean, like, we all agree that Alice in Wonderland's a bit of a trip.
Well, and it's yeah.
But it's like, how does this work out? You know what I mean? And so like, I was very curious about this one. And so like I looked it up, and it was one of those deals where like somebody, in 1996, an author by the name of Richard Wallace committed a very different story to paper. He wrote it in a full-length book called Jack the Ripper, The Lighthearted Friend. And he essentially accused Lewis Carroll as well as Thomas Verbain for committing these murders and then essentially hiding clues inside of a nursery, like a young kid's version of Alice in Wonderland called The Nursery Alice, as well as the first volume of Sylvie and Bruno, which is another of his works. So very kind of like almost like give me like Da Vinci Code.
Yeah.
Vibes.
Very deep.
Yeah. And I mean, like, some people will say like.
Really quick, Parker. Sorry to just so we want to table it because we are historically accurate. You were right the first time. His name is Charles Dawson. Pen name is Lewis Carroll. I made you switch back, and that is how it works. So Lewis Carroll is the pen name. Continue though. Sorry.
So like, I think one of the biggest problems for this is that people are like, oh well, they were like. There's a lot of like circumstantial evidence. Yep. Like Lewis Carroll was in the same area, so were 76,000 other
people.
And then there's also like some during the time period, the time frame of the murders, like he was supposedly on vacation somewhere else. He was in East Sussex, and then some people might, if you've seen, no, I don't want to spoil that, but like maybe he just told people he was in East Sussex and then like put on some sort of, disguise and came back and perpetrated these evil crimes. But again, very posthumously, like being accused of this.
Yeah.
One of the people that was accused, like kind of in the time frame that I thought was interesting was Prince Albert Victor.
Yes, that one threw me off too.
The grandson of the Queen.
Yeah.
The rumor was that he had. Well, it's kind of like two-pronged. You can kind of take it either which way you want. Either that he had frequented a house of ill repute or a lady of ill repute, and either contracted or at some other point contracted a venereal disease, which led to his madness and decline. And he didn't actually die of like the flu or whatever. It was actually some venereal disease. And the other one was that he fathered a child with a woman in Whitechapel. And so the murders were actually perpetrated to cover up the illegitimate child's existence or the end of that child.
Yeah.
By ending the women that would have known the information that he was involved.
Yeah.
And again, people have said, well, he wasn't in London. He was in Scotland when the double event occurred. Like he was on a royal retreat in Scotland, and a number of people vouch for him. Yeah. But if and then you have the tinfoil hat conspiracies that come out and say, well, if you're good to be the king, like, or the crown prince, you can tell people that you were there when you weren't. Or again, if you're covering up an indiscretion, you don't do it yourself. You
hire people to do it.
You have people who bring you vacuum cleaners. He calls Saul.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and so what I found interesting about this is like I think it's safe to say that we will never know the identity of Jack the Ripper. Would you say that's probably a fair thing? Unless something like we would need something magical to appear. Something like a diary or something that's probably lost at this point to history in terms of that. Because I mean, there's no way to have DNA evidence. There's no, like, even though we have that technology today, there's no way to pull that stuff from. What are you thinking? You're thinking. You're looking up. That's when you do your thinking.
Sherman and Peabody need to arrive.
I'm kidding.
If we had the Wayback Machine, we can go back and find out.
I don't know if you want to use the Wayback Machine to go back and find out. Like, I don't want to come across it. I don't want to look at it. I mean, I think though that this gets that lore, like you said, because of the newspapers pumping this out, and it was, killer on the streets of London, and it had to do with women. But what I found interesting is the idea that was pushed later, and I believe it was pushed by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, the author of Sherlock Holmes. He pushed the theory of Jill the Ripper, and that this was a female that was conducting these murders. Now, I would think that this would be dismissed pretty quickly, because usually when women wanted to do away with somebody, they did it through, I guess, nonviolent means. Would that be safe to say throughout history?
Sure, a lot of poisoning.
Yeah, things that, like, or like you said, hiring somebody to take care of it. But what's interesting, and the theory that's pushed, is that if Jack the Ripper is really Jill the Ripper could have been a midwife, someone who handles uh, pregnancies and labor and delivery and things like that back in the day. And that was the tie to the eviscerations and the things like that, knowing the body, knowing where to cut, knowing, those different types of things. But it's all kind of, as gruesome as this sounds, it's all kind of fan theory at this point, right? Like, my wife came in before we were recording, and she found out we were recording on Jack the Ripper tonight, and she goes, "Oh, I did a Jack the Ripper walking tour in London," and it's stuff like that. And I said, "Well, what was it like?" And she goes, "It was just really creepy." Because again, where these things happen, right? Like Barker said from the start, the Industrial Revolution has filled the cities quickly, a lot quicker than good housing can be built, right? So it's one of those where, it's not a clean, safe place to call home.
Yeah, one of the more recent articles that I saw using DNA,
Okay.
linked it to a man named Aaron Kosminski,
Yep.
who's a Polish Jew, who apparently was not fond of prostitutes, and was later, I guess, institutionalized into an asylum. The evidence is supported. I think they used mitochondrial DNA from a descendant of his family to try and show that it was on the DNA sample was taken from a shawl from the crime scene, or from Eddowes, that belonged to Catherine Eddowes. And so, but there's a lot of, that doesn't mean that necessarily might be his material on her shawl. It could be from a number of reasons why it's there. It's circumstantial. It's not conclusive. And then there's also problems of how do we trust DNA material that's been around for over a century? Like, how degraded is it? There's two other ones that I thought were interesting. One of them was mentioned by one of our ELA teachers when I brought this up today in the guidance office.
Oh, okay.
So a shout out to Mrs. Eveland. So Walter Sickert is a painter. His work is in the Tate Gallery in England somewhere, wherever that is. It's probably in the city of Tate. But he has a series of paintings, and he is even rumored to have said to have purchased and rented a room that Jack the Ripper had stayed in. Somebody said, I think Jack the Ripper stayed here, and then he came and rented the room afterwards and painted some paintings. One of them is called The Camden Town Murderer, originally entitled What Shall We Do for Rent, which shows a man kind of dismembered, or kind of over a female body, in a kind of Jack the Ripper-ish kind of vibe. And so there's a lot of theory that he seemed to be pretty interested in the subject matter, kind of painted darker, more what's the word I'm looking for? Not macabre, but painted darker subject matter. Was apparently familiar with ladies of ill repute. Used them potentially in some of his paintings as models.
Yeah.
In other circumstances. So that was one that was interesting. And that was his is another posthumous claim. And the person that kind of pushed that theory that it could be this painter is Patricia Cromwell.
Oh, okay.
who's an American, kind of like mystery writer,
Hmm.
and said that she thought the connection, she thought it was that he wrote the letters. Like there might be a connection between the letters and him
Okay.
being at that time. And then this one, I mean, I watched like 3 or 4 different, like one was a British made documentary, one was from the History Channel, one was from another source. And I watched 3 of these Jack the Ripper, finding the real Jack the Ripper. Everybody had a
Yeah.
different answer.
Yeah.
Nobody, the same name doesn't come up
No.
twice. I think the BBC, like all these guys sit down and like have a discussion of like whose theory are you going to run with? Run with this one, and run with that one,
Yeah.
so they can kind of, again, it's still an industry. Like you said, India went on a tour
Yeah.
they're still making tourist money off of Jack the Ripper in the modern day.
Yeah.
Um, Francis Tumblety is a U.S. doctor, and I use the term doctor lightly. Um, some people would say a snake oil salesman
Okay.
or a fraud, a
Yeah.
mountebank. Um, known for selling pornography,
Yeah.
uh, abortion cures, and other just like mercury to cure other ailments. I mean, very
Yeah.
much like this whole thing makes me think of Sweeney Todd, and it makes me
Yeah.
think of the Italian guy that Sacha Baron Cohen plays in the new one, where he's trying to sell people like hair growth, like
Right. Yeah.
elixir,
Yeah.
and it's he comes over there, but he apparently had a huge disdain for women, and in his home in the U.S. apparently had a number of like uteri, um, like in jars, like body parts of women that he had through, I guess, medical study, because that's kind of how medicine worked back then, is like you would take cadavers and like cut up cadavers and then put stuff in formaldehyde.
Yeah.
But apparently he just had a collection of like female body parts and formaldehyde.
Interesting.
And at one point at a dinner party kind of showed people, and people were like, yeah, I think we're going to leave now.
Oh,
Um,
yeah.
but he takes a trip, and he's in London during the time period of the murders. He actually gets like questioned and brought in on a different charge,
Yeah.
jumps bail, like pays bail, gets out, and then runs back to New York, and
Huh.
then the murders stop.
Interesting.
So like, I think he's one of the ones that sounds. I mean, again, it's not necessary. It's proximity, not causation, right?
Correct. Correct. Correct.
So like all this stuff happens, but
You know
it
what's
doesn't
interesting about
necessarily.
that, Barker, about him? Because I didn't dive too much into that. Like because like you said, there's so many people, so I didn't really dive in. Did you see that he was brought in? He was arrested for the assassination of Abraham Lincoln.
I didn't see that.
Yeah, so he is. I just got done reading the book on the assassination of Lincoln. He is believed he's an associate of David Harold. David Harold is the guy who assists Booth in getting as far as he did. And then he'll hang. He's one of the younger guys. Like I think he's in his 20s when he hangs for the crime. Um, he's one of Booth's accomplices. Yeah, so he's hanged when he's 23. But anyway, the thought is that Francis Tumblety is a associate of him. So
Yeah, one of the reasons that they didn't suspect him early on is that he has apparently later in life had a very robust mustache. But during his trips to London, his mustache was not so robust. Um, and I think the other problem is that like you're relying on people. This is in the infancy of police forensics.
right.
People are taking testimony, and as we know, I taught psychology for 2 years, and like we know that in conversations with authorities, there is a need to please, like a subconscious need to please, and sometimes like leading police can ask leading questions and get the responses that they want unwittingly, not saying that they're trying to do that, but just
Yeah.
simply like setting stuff up, you can lead to getting bad information or inconclusive information. Like you said, I don't think we're ever going to solve who Jack the Ripper was. And
No.
if if somebody did say that they had a diary or a journal, I think it would be so scrutinized.
That it couldn't be.
Yeah,
I
that
mean, you couldn't. There's no way. I just don't think there's any way to prove it, right? Like you said, even if you had DNA evidence, that DNA has been, this is the 1880s, right? You're talking what? I can do math. 40. So you're talking like 260, years ago, or sorry, 200. That's bad. That was terrible math. 240 years ago, right? Ish. Am I that bad?
I think you're bad. I think you're bad at math. I think
I'm
it's
bad.
100.
Thank you, because it's not 18. Yeah.
140 years ago.
Thank you. Yeah, because it'd be 19. Thank you. God, I'm bad at math.
I have my shoes off, so don't worry.
Okay.
And
Anyway,
bust
I hope
out.
everyone gets a giggle out of that one. So, but yeah, I mean, it's a really interesting topic. Like it's etched in lore. Like even we know who Jack the Ripper is living in the United States, right? Like this is something that happened in London. It happened in the 1880s. Like there's no real reason we should know about this.
Yeah,
But
it's not like he provides there's no clear and present danger to the populace of America.
No, zero.
And it's like the part that really blew me away is that I guess I never really delved that far into Jack the Ripper. It's 5 victims, and I don't mean that in a negative way, but it's just like we have a laundry list of people inside the United States who've done far worse to far more people, or maybe not far worse, but like done victimized way more people.
But I guess like the biggest thing, like you said, would be like one, it's like the newspaper, but two, it's also the brutality of the crime, right? Like we have that in today's world, unfortunately, but like in 18th century or in 19th century London, like that brutality of a woman has like everything taken out, everything like throat cut, you know what I mean? Like it's kind of like that thought, probably, you cut her throat, she's dead. Like, why are you, and it's that morbid curiosity of like, why would you do this? So.
It sells papers.
It really does.
The thing, like, as soon as I started thinking about this, like, I like musicals, and I was thinking about Sweeney Todd, and I was like, did somebody make Sweeney Todd like after this happened? You know what I mean? Like, did it, because like somebody go, oh, this guy's gonna murder all these people and then like turn them into meat pies and like get rid of the bodies because Jack the Ripper didn't do that. But actually, Sweeney Todd predates.
Oh, does it? Predates Jack the Ripper.
The first creation and like publication of Sweeney Todd, not the musical, but the story of like this demon barber of Fleet Street, actually comes out 40 years earlier in 1846.
Oh.
So
Sweeney Todd inspired Jack the Ripper.
Just didn't find a lady who owned a pie shop.
Apparently. It's like, can you bake? No. Sorry.
And that's why, Miss Lovett, I won't try your meat pies if you bring them to the staff potluck.
Terrifying. Although, side note, not human meat pies, but if you ever are in New Zealand, or even London, actually, they have them in there. A solid meat pie is a great way to start your breakfast. So.
Just don't get it from one that's below a barbershop.
Yes, please don't. Please don't. Bark, anything else? Kind of wrap this one up.
Protect yourself when you're out and about late at night. Make sure that you don't have both your earbuds in and that you are aware of your surroundings.
Yep.
Buddy system is a good system.
Yep. Pay attention. My dad always says it, head on a swivel. So, quick update at the very end of our episode. If you've stuck around this long, mazel tov. If you haven't, you're probably Mr. Ramsey asleep on the couch right now. Because we put him to sleep apparently sometimes with some of these Turnbark times. But there is an update on our TikTok episode that dropped last week. For those of you following along at home, TikTok, or ByteDance, I believe, sued the United States government in federal courts, filing a lawsuit saying that their law that they passed and Joe Biden signed to force the sale of TikTok will violate the First Amendment of the 170 million users that call TikTok their freedom of expression. And so this saga continues. If I'm a gambling man, which I tend to be, I will say that the district court and the Court of Appeals will side in favor of ByteDance or TikTok, and then it will be up to the Supreme Court, which I think could be a little bit of a wild card. You're going to have to prove national security threat and see what happens from there. So, yep. So, folks, we'll leave you from London in the 1880s. Have a pleasant morrow. If not, until next time, on The Turn.
I'm the Buck.
We're going to be here a long, long time. Have a good night, everybody.
Be safe.
And by golly, be well.